Yo, yo, yo. Hey guys, welcome back to another awesome edition of the Best Practices Show podcast. One of the challenges you have as a dentist is I want to grow, but do I need to add more chairs and more operatories and more patients? Well, today we're going to answer that question with an amazing coach. Her name is Miranda Beeson, and we did a webinar recently that was titled The Profitable Practice Paradox, Growing Without More Chairs. And it was awesome. So I thought I would share the audio version on the podcast. So here it is. Please listen up. Hope you guys enjoy this, and we'll see you soon.
Paradox of growing without more chairs. I know you're going to be excited about this one.
I do love this one. This is one of my favorite topics. We love this stuff. And if you're new to the ACT community or BPA community, what we do is we're coaches and we love this stuff. And this is what we do all day. We work with great practices that are just struggling with how to get greater or better or improve a lot of things. And this is a conversation that comes up a lot. It also comes up a lot when I'm out on the road speaking or talking to dentists anywhere, whether it be in a seminar or even dental schools, is like, how big should I make my practice? And so we're gonna speak to that today. And it may be hard to keep this to an hour because I love this topic so much.
We'll do our best.
Yeah.
Before we dive in, let's just share though a little bit about To the Top, a little bit about BPA for anybody who might be listening that's new to ACT. And I'll let you take it away because you're so good at giving your passion around all this to our listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. We started this thing called the Inner Circle many years back. And the whole idea was just to create our own study club of people doing this, creating a better practice and better life. We started in Chicago. It grew and grew and grew. And it grew into what's now called the To the Top Study Club. Some of the best thinkers. It includes our pro clients, people that are exclusively in the To the Top Study Club. And we do it once a quarter, live in the workshop setting here in Milwaukee in our state-of-the-art training center. And we now have 2 sessions of almost 50 in each one of them. And we love it so much. It's so much content, and it'll blow your mind if you come where you do it up. We do it up right with food and everything. It's one Friday per quarter where you get away from your family, get away from your practice, and give yourself permission to think better. And we share all the secrets. Now, not only are we facilitating the process, but you also have everybody else in the room. So you get to learn from everybody else. And selfishly, that's my favorite thing because we get to learn from great thinkers, great entrepreneurs all over the country. They share what they're doing. I'm like, that is brilliant. And so we love the CE part of it. And we love it so much. And we put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it that we have what's called the golden ticket. If you want to come hang out, you can come be our guest for free for one day, and you can kick the tires and see what it's all about. And if you hate it, you can go, and we'll just chalk it up as a great day in CE.
Not going to happen. Not going
to happen. That's how much we believe in it. So come join us, be our guest. And in order to redeem the ticket, you have to connect with Gina, Gina, on our team at actdental.com. And she will be your personal concierge host. We'll lay out the red carpet. We don't actually have a red carpet, but we should. And make you feel at home. So join us.
I think we have a BPA carpet, so we can roll that out.
We totally could. Yeah.
So a little bit about what we do and who we are. We have a new part of, it's really not that new, but it's new and improved, our Best Practices Association. And we wanted to build a way to reach even more people in a way that like maybe you can't get to Milwaukee. And so how can we spread our message? So we kind of came up with this visual that helps represent a little bit about what ACT has to offer. So we talk about you can do it yourself through the Best Practices Association. You can listen to this webinar and other webinars like this and look at our tools and resources within the Best Practices Association, within the BPA, and do it on your own and see how far you can go. And then from there, you can do it in a group. that's our To the Top Study Club that Kirk was just talking about. If you want to be with other like-minded dental practice owners learning and growing together in your practice, then you can join that study club and you can do it in a group. And ultimately, if you want to take it to the next level, we can do some one-on-one coaching. So I'm a lead practice coach with ACT, and there's many more of us who help support teams to take their practices that are already wonderful and amazing and then just take them to the next level. We're not necessarily, we can take on just about any challenge, but most of the teams that come to us are already in a good place and they just want to know, how can I make this even better? Anything else on that, Kirk?
Yeah. If you've just tried everything and you're like, I've tried everything, pro coaching is for you. And that's where we hold you accountable and make you do it. We can say things to your team you can't say in a way that you can't say them. And so, and also too, the biggest challenge that you have as an entrepreneur, I'll just speak to the dentist, is you don't have time to be an entrepreneur. You're too busy working with patients a lot of times. And so having a great coach like Miranda or any of our other coaches, it's almost like putting somebody who's brilliant on your leadership team to help you think better about your practice. And all of these motions that you make, it makes your practice better and better and better. This is all we do. And yeah, come join us. You can pick your journey here.
Awesome. And we have an app. We're going to have our very own app coming really, really soon. But the space itself, there's an app already there. You can have it right there in the palm of your hand, connecting with your friends and colleagues that are part of the ACT community. So yeah, we're excited about the BPA.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, we got to get into the meat of it here, the content itself. And so today we talked about, the title of our program is The Profitable Practice Paradox. Say that 3 times fast. Growing without more chairs. And this is really important because a lot of our dentists in our community tell us, they find themselves comparing themselves to messages that maybe are in our industry or the guy down the street, or just feeling the need to maybe add more chairs, either because they're feeling a little stressed and overwhelmed and overworked, or because it's what the doctor down the road is doing and is maybe that what I should be doing too. And before you hire more providers to try to meet those financial goals, we want to help you to think like, what if there was a way to maximize your true profitability that wasn't about doing more, but making the most of what you already have. And so we're going to really be focusing today on how can I grow, and what does grow really mean without necessarily growing physically in terms of our space, in terms of our providers. Kirk, this is such a great image of what growth can look like.
Well, I love
practices.
I love to tell stories. This is an actual dental practice in the United States. I'm sorry if it's yours, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but like, the narrative in dentistry is growth mode. We're in growth mode. And a lot of people don't really give great context or clarity to what growth is. Now, I always want to be growing intellectually, spiritually, financially, culturally. But we think of growth typically in a very linear fashion of how big or how fancy, and then it's really easy to get into the tech conversation. You have one CBCT. Oh my gosh. No, I actually have 2 of them. And we got scanners for each room, blah, 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 blah. And I'll just remind you before we get into this, comparison is the thief of joy. If you did this with your homes and you said, oh, my buddy's got a bigger home, I'll just get one too. It doesn't always lead to happiness. And I've actually found that the bigger it gets, if you're not built for that, the more miserable you are. At the end of the day, you got to pick your journey. This isn't bad. I'm not saying that this graphic is bad, but if it isn't you, it is bad. You gotta find out who you are. And I've learned early, I'm like a one conversation at a time person. I don't need like 400 people around me. I don't want 400 people around me. I don't need. So my point is that we've been led to believe that growth is just good, and growth for the sake of growth is the ideology of a cancer cell. And so I don't think growth is always that good when it's just including the top line. And conventional business wisdom has long been grounded in the belief that if your dental practice isn't growing in size and operatories, it's dying. And that's not true. In fact, growth for growth's sake can wear a dental practice thin. It can decrease the doctor and the team member's satisfaction, And it can also water down the patient's benefits. And so that's why I'm a big fan of better, not bigger. And I'll just like, I don't know if you've been to any dental meeting, like any dental meeting where you start talking practice management, this is how it goes. I sat in one in the back. What do you produce? 4.1. What do you produce? 3.2. How many ops do you have? I have 9. How many do you have? I have 12. Where do you practice? How many team members? Like that's how it all starts. And you're like, and that is not, we're not having the apples to apples conversation. So the goal of this webinar today is to help you think better, not bigger.
I love that. And there's so many things within our practice that if we really look at with a magnifying glass, if we look at with a fine tooth comb, we can grow in profitability. So I love what you just mentioned about the comparison that we usually throw around is what do you produce? What do you produce? And the answer when we want to make more money, meaning have more money in the bank at the end of the day for most people is, well, I need to produce more then I need to produce more. I need to produce more. And for a lot of people, the physical growth stems from thinking the only way to make more money and get more money into the practice's savings account, maybe even improve your owner compensation or your team compensation, is we have to produce more. But I can't produce more with the space that I have, and I can't physically produce anymore. I'm only one person. I must need an associate. Maybe I need more operatories. And so we're going to challenge your thinking to think that if we can look with the magnifying glass at some of the things that we're doing within the practice right now, just right where it is, there might be a way for you to grow and hit some of those goals without having to grow physically. And so that's why I challenge, what does growth really mean to you? If you're thinking I need to grow, in what way? Like, how would you define growth? And if growth in the end for you just means I want to be more profitable, this is the answer. This is going to help you to alleviate having more additional stress without that physical growth.
Let me offer a suggestion too. So I'll quickly answer that because I'm trying to be, funny about this, but I also want to make this simple. Like growth, if I was listening to this, would be, okay, I work too much, so I want to work less. That's growth for me. I want to make more money. That's growth for me. And I want people to be happier. Okay, that's growth for me. It doesn't mean more operatories. And so we want you to think in that term, in those, like what does growth really mean for you in those respects? So I love the way you're going about
Well,
this.
yes. And it like you said, maybe that diagram, that blueprint is for somebody, and maybe that's for somebody in our community. Well, even if you're growing in that capacity and that is part of your dream and your goal, wouldn't you also want to make sure that as you do that, you're as profitable as you can be along the way? Because you can get bigger and actually make less. And so if you're going to get bigger and that's part of your dream, I do want to have an associate. I don't want to practice by myself. I do want to have, we're a community that doesn't really have a lot of practitioners. So I'd love to be able to expand my practice to take care of more people in my community. Great. This is still going to apply to you in that you want to make sure that if you are going to grow physically, that you're being really careful and monitoring where does all of that go in the end, and how can we make sure we're taking advantage of all of the tiny pieces, which we call the gaps. So we'll be talking a little bit about our gaps today. And one of those things is just looking small oversights within write-offs and collections can really lead to significant revenue loss. So if we're focusing on, I'd like to grow, I want to be more profitable. Like you said, I'd like to be able to take more days off. I'd like to be able to get to my kids' volleyball games when they start at 4:00. I would like to be able to feel less stress and be happier and have a happy team. If part of that is, I don't want to be as burdened by the financial burden of this practice, then this is the way to look at it. Look at your write-offs and your adjustments. Look at your collections. See where there might be room to improve. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of those things today as we go through the webinar.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
We're also going to dig into your expenses and cash flow. Those are other parts of the practice that, again, if you fine tooth comb and put a magnifying glass on what we're spending on a monthly basis, as well as maybe what's going out after that net profit that we see at the bottom of our P&L when our CPA tells us we're crushing it, but it doesn't feel like it, right? The bank account isn't saying the same thing. Let's put a fine tooth comb through that. Let's magnify what's really happening in each of these aspects of the practice and see how we can maximize and become more efficient with each of those areas, and then grow by way of our bank account without necessarily adding more people. Like you can grow your practice and put more money in the bank without adding more ops, without adding more chairs, more procedures, more people, which ultimately leads to more stress, not less. And so that's what we want to help you do today. Anything else before we jump into write-offs and that first piece of it, Kirk?
Yeah. And I'll just say this, as you're growing, you can write this down. Growth sucks cash. That's one thing people don't remember is like any type of growth, you need cash. You need cash on hand. You need cash to grow. You need cash. And when you don't have any cash, I don't care who you are. I don't care how good your values are. When you don't have any money, it is very hard to be who you want to be. You're paper thin. You're stressed out. You feel the responsibility of this. And I'm here to tell you, you can make a ton of money in dentistry. You can pay your team really well if you do this right. If you just know what you're doing, you know the data, and you're very aware of the trends and how all of this works. And that's a big part of what we're going to do today.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. Well, let's jump into it then. So the first piece is around the first gap that we'll talk about is the effort gap. And we'll dig in more to what the gaps are specifically. But what is the difference between your gross production and your net production and that effort that has to go out to produce gross? So I always like to just start with practices and understanding adjustments. And the biggest adjustment or write-off that a practice takes is around insurance in most cases. If you're participating and contracted with insurance companies, there's going to be a significant amount of the effort and energy that you and your team put into producing dentistry that you do not have the opportunity to collect on. So adjustments made to your gross production that are a result of your contractual agreements with insurance carriers is really what we're talking about when we're looking at insurance adjustments. And the average dental practice in the US is writing off 30 to 40%. And I've seen clients within our community who are coming to us for help that are over 40%. I've seen clients at 50% or really, really close to it. When you're looking at that, it's not uncommon to see those 40, 45, even 47%. That's half of your work week. That's half of your work year that you're working really for free. And so when we're looking at those adjustments, I know you threw some stuff together here to really kind of layer onto this, but it is not uncommon to see a significant amount of the effort that teams are putting out being ultimately given away and that we cannot collect on that revenue.
Yeah. And so this is just one of your items, action items is when we talk to a dentist, and this might be you, we say, well, how many do you participate? Well, really only one, it's Delta. And then when we pull it, it's like, oh gosh, it's not even close to one. As you can look here, this is an actual client of ours who assumed they were only participating with one. But when you look at the concentration by payer, you can actually see the breakdown. And so my first point is like, you got to know this stuff. You can't just think, oh, I think I participate with one. And looking at this data with the help of a coach or having a team member pull this on a regular basis, it's going to reduce all of the crazy thinking that you have. Data doesn't lie. It tells you exactly how much we produce. Now, this is fun for me because I believe in my team so much and I love my team and this is all we do. So Miranda prepared the slides and she didn't even know. And Barrett, I know you're listening. So this is what we're going to do on a couple of these. In the future, we're just going to play like a game show and go, we're going to try to stump Miranda today. So you can think of this as like, we're going to throw up a difficult case today. So let's just pretend that we're all dentists or experts. And I'm going to throw a case up here and we're just going to talk about it. Now I could talk about this case. This is an actual client of ours. I hit a lot of the information, but I can talk about this one for about an hour. And I want to point out a couple things. And then Miranda, I just want you to chime in. So this is actual breakdown. This is a great way to start the conversation. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to see a couple things that I point out. There's 1,883 active patients in this practice. And as you go to the next one, you're going to see that 209 and 291. Now they classify it as fee for service and out of network in there. So if you combine those two patients or what we call segments, that's an equivalent of 500 patients out of 1,883. So 26% of this patient base is paying full fee. I want you to hear that as clearly as possible. And if I was coaching this practice, and we are coaching this practice, one of the things that we do is like, hey, how do we build those two segments of our patient base and start to nurture those? And that becomes a great initiative. Now, if we go to the next one, you're going to see 787 patients are on Delta. And the percentage of total write-offs for this group is exactly what you said, Miranda. It's 44%. Now look at that. The full fee for production or allowable fee production is 1.2, total collections 406. So we're writing off 44%. Now, again, let's look further into the data. Go to the next slide. This is the one that freaks me out. So we're looking at 2,307 visits out of 5,200. So almost half, or just slightly under half of the visits. So not only the write-offs, but you could almost say half of our chair time, half of the time we spent, we're getting half of our fee. So just starting here with something as basic as this, you can go, well, that's crazy. Let's not do that anymore, because I can assure you that the more you don't know this, the more it slowly infiltrates your practice. Now, a couple other things that I love. I know this is Barrett's favorite metric, but it's annual patient value. Look at the annual patient value for the first two segments, $874 and $1,696. So the question becomes, where do I want to spend my time? The big thing I want you to see is like, let's not talk about like destroying everything. Where are we going to put our focus? The biggest problem in the world is we don't give our best energy to things that matter most. We give our energy to everything. And usually in growth mode, we're giving energy to everything. Not all patients are good for your practice. There are a handful of them that appreciate who you are. They show up on time and they pay for what you do. And that's the question you need to ask yourself as a team. And so if I'm a young dentist and I'm in my 30s, where am I going to spend the next 2 decades? I can tell you by looking at this, I'm going to spend the next 2 decades building a practice that people want to be here, right?
Yeah, Kirk, another point to this APV number. If you're looking at just this example in itself, you're at $500. I'm going to round it down. $500 per patient that's on Delta, and you're at almost 1,700. If we round up 1,700 for these 291 patients that are out of network. That is a third of the patients that I could see and still make the same amount of money, right? Because I'm getting 3 times as much per patient on my out-of-network patients as I am on my insurance contracted patients, where I'm giving away half of what I'm doing. So you would have to see 3 point something patients at this Delta APV to equal 1 patient that's paying your full fees.
100%.
So I think that's another great way to look at it. And so that's when we talk about volume. And do we really need another provider because we have so many patients that we need to see? Or can we stay and really kind of create this more boutique concierge style of practice that I can more comfortably manage as a solo provider, see less patients and just see more of the patients that value what I do and produce more, each visit that they come in.
That was the diagnosis. So this is so fun because Miranda didn't even know I was leading her in this direction. But that was the conclusion I was hoping you're going to come to. And you did, is like, why would I just add to this? Why would I add operatories to feed this fire, knowing that half of them, I'm not making any money and I'm working free. And these people are going to refer other people like them. And in no time, I'm going to need a few more operatories. And you're also flying in the face of the biggest challenge in dentistry, which is finding great team members. So to support this whole thing. Now go to the next slide. This is awesome. The cool thing about working with a great coach like Miranda or anybody on our team is they're just going to point out the obvious. There are some quick wins, some great opportunities. There's no reason to stay on these plans. Look at the number of patients on the left. This is a great opportunity for you and your team to sit down, take a look at this and go, listen, let's start moving away from these. These have such little impact on your practice that you can practice telling them we're not participating with this, and then see how many of them you retain. You'll be shocked without having it be a huge impact in your practice. And you go, we did it. And like a handful of them stayed.
Yeah. In this particular example, I'm just glancing, what is that? 100 patients? It's 100 patients. And you're probably going to end up keeping at least half, if not 80% of those patients. So you're still going to end up with 50 to 80 of those patients staying in your practice. And you're going to be able to collect more per each of those patients, which is plenty. Because as we know, when we're giving away or writing off part of that, like we don't need as many.
Right.
So it's 100 patients.
So here's my tagline for today. You guys write this down if you're looking at better, not bigger. That's the point. Better, not bigger. So like, don't go bigger on this. Make it better. So, and then usually what happens, and this isn't the case, but if you advance the slides, you're like, oh, I'm going to build this facility. Well, I'm going to make all this money. And then go to the next one. You're like, oh my gosh, we're writing off a lot more. And oh my gosh, I just lost an associate, or I'm hiring an associate. I don't have any money. Well, I got to keep them busy. Oh
also, I'm paying for all these loans on the new equipment and the new chairs and the building that I had to build to make all this work.
I'm so glad you said that. Think about this. Bigger is more space. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's when people don't think about it. Bigger is more space. It's more equipment. And if you've ever been to the ADEC facility in Oregon, I have been there. Your heart races. You are like, I can't wait to. I don't even own dental equipment, but I was watching people like their hands are shaking. Like, I got to get this. I got to get that. It's beautiful. You can't wait to put this in. There was one guy with me. I'm like, you don't even have an op. I know, but I got to have this. Like, you got to have it. And it's not cheap. So you start to do the math and what it does. And while this might imply profitability, it really speaks to happiness. You're just like, why am I doing all of this? And what's really sad is a lot of people just give up and they're just like, I'm just going to sell. I can't do this anymore. Yeah. We don't want you to do that.
Agreed. I bumped ahead and I didn't mean to.
No, go right ahead.
Good point.
So
yeah, no, I've actually had I've had coaching clients who, and I know I'm not the only one because I talked to the other coaches about this, who have shared exactly that. The clients come on board and they're reaching out to coaching because they don't want to sell, right? They right. do love owning a practice and being able to be a small business owner in their community and being able to provide a livelihood for their team members in their community and treat these patients. But they're just feeling so burdened by the financial and sometimes even the business, the managerial leadership side of running a practice. And so that's why they reach out to coaching. And I've had them say, like, maybe I should just sell. And it's like, no, wait, let's try first, because I know you want this and I know you love this. And they're so passionate and emotional about it. And so when there's ways for us to be able to navigate this and help them see there's another way, I know it fills your bucket. It fills my bucket for sure.
100%. I love that.
So we spent quite a bit of time on insurance adjustments because it's such a big piece of the write-off picture, but we don't want to leave out these other smaller pieces that can sometimes weigh into that effort gap or the write-off aspect, which is membership plan adjustments. And these are adjustments that are made to provide a courtesy to patients. They can pay annually or monthly, and it's generally to be a part of your membership plan, build loyalty to the practice for the patients who don't have dental insurance. And so it's a nice marketing that a lot of practices do to have something in-house that offers some courtesies. I like the word courtesy over discount, but some courtesies or discounts towards services. And a lot of times includes or incorporates their hygiene care, and that helps keep them tethered to the practice. And it's also a great thing to build in if you are considering leaving contracts and going out of network or into that fee-for-service model, just to have something. It's going to be a much smaller percentage in write-off than what you're going to be writing off in the dental insurance realm. And like I just mentioned before, it builds loyalty, helps keep those uninsured patients tethered to the practice. And in turn, we're going to offer a courtesy to services. Tip though, review your membership plan fees and courtesies annually, just like you would your fees overall. You do want to make sure that as your practice and your fees in your practice grow, that your membership plan grows with it. Because I have seen times when the membership plan is working against you and then your write-offs are right back where they were before because we're giving away a little too much within the membership plan. So just doing an annual review of your fees, making sure that they correlate with any fee increases you're doing in the practice, looking at those courtesies and what you're providing in terms of a write-off and making sure it still fits within your greater goals. And then the last part of adjustments is around elective adjustments. So these are write-offs that we're taking that are typically voluntary, adjustments that are initiated by the practice, right? We're not contracted to do this, but those are common examples: friends and family, employee courtesies, cash courtesies, senior citizen courtesies, military courtesies, warranty courtesies, like if you prorate any of your dentistry, a lot of service and trade, people will do barter. So you're writing things off to compensate for maybe your stylist who does your hair or something of that nature. The one I wanted to mention last, which is kind of in the middle of the list here, is doctor applied courtesy. And that's a lot of times in an office, it might just say miscellaneous or professional courtesy. But I think it's really good to get clear around when a doctor says, 10% for this one, or can you go ahead and give Mrs. Jones 20%? Or if they do that crown on 13, I'm going to go ahead and take care of the crown on 14. There's things like that happen in a practice all the time. Now, as a coach, I'm going to encourage you to be really careful about how much you're giving away as a doctor. But the most important thing that I think stems around that is running a report every single month to know and understand the adjustments. There are doctors who are very altruistic and they want to be giving back and giving away. I just think it's important to know and see it on paper, because a lot of times, even those really highly altruistic doctors are surprised to see how much they're giving away. So I think at minimum, once a month, run an adjustment report and take a look at what is going out the door. Now you can select within your software to not include insurance write-offs and have this just be relative to your membership plans and your elective adjustments. And I know when we work with teams in the GAP scorecard, we actually have that segmented out as well. And we have teams represent their insurance adjustments separate from the membership plan and separate from elective.
Yeah. I think the big thing you already said is this is a big challenge for most offices, and putting in full fee all the time for everything is really important in categorizing these elective adjustments, because it's going to account for your time. And usually if you have a big heart, you're giving away a lot and you don't think it's a lot and it's not a big deal. But when you look at it, you're gonna be like, oh my goodness. And there was a dentist that I took my whole family to. I hope he's not listening, but he would just go NC on a piece of paper, no charge, no charge. Every time he came in, no charge. I'm like, no charge, like never charged me for anything for years. And there were days where I had everyone in tow, like everyone. And we were booking chairs, and like he was very successful. I get that, but like you're not accounting for anybody in this family for all of that. Now that's an extreme thing, but what you do want to do is you can get your arms around this and you can build a better business.
Well, you made a good point of billing full fee. I don't have that in there, but bill your full fee because then that's the only way to really see these adjustments. And so what Kirk's referring to in bill your full fee, if that's not making sense, is if you have a fee schedule within your office, your master fee schedule, your usual and customary fee schedule, your UCR, whatever you might call it within your software, what are the fees that your practice has set? Ideally, those fees are going to correlate with the 70th, 80th, sometimes 90th percentile for your region. Our teams that work with coaches, we're able to help you look at your fees and make sure that they fit the geographic region that you live in. But what are those master fees or your full fee? When we talk about billing full fee, that should be posted in your ledger and that should be submitted to insurance every single time. Then you take the adjustments for all of these things. It happens quite often. I'll have a team that I start working with and I'm like, that's weird. You guys had $0 in adjustments. Now I know your fee for service, but there has to be something that you wrote off last month. Well, we just zeroed that out. And so that happens a lot where people will just change they're doing maybe the crown for free. I don't know why. And so they'll just change it from 1,800 to 0 instead of doing that adjustment and calling it what it is. And that's when you can get a little lost and not really being able to have the data to make good decisions. So billing full fee means when you set that procedure complete, it goes into the ledger at the full fee. And then your administrative team is taking the appropriate adjustment to indicate what you're actually charging. And then you will have the ability to run those reports at the end of the month and see what was the difference between what we could have and what we did.
Right. Love it.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yes.
Yes. So point here is that you can grow simply by reducing your write-offs. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of how does just shrinking that one gap, our write-offs, our effort gap, make an impact on our overall profitability. Before we do that, we're going to talk about the next gap, which is the collections gap. And this is simple. You should be collecting 100% of what you net produce. So we talked about write-offs, gross production, then you take your write-offs and then you get your net production. This is what you can collect on, and you should be collecting 100% of what you produce. Net production is your collectible production. And so we see a lot of offices that start to fall into that 99%, 98%, 97%, 96%, 95%. When you have a $1 million practice and there's 5% that you didn't collect that year, that's a significant amount of money that otherwise could have been in your bank account. Some important things to think about too is when these balances start to become overdue. At 60 days overdue, you're only at 60 to 70% likely to collect on that. When it's 90 days overdue, you're down to half. I'd say 30% is more realistic. And anything over 90 days, this says 10 to 20, and I feel like that's gracious when I looked at this report, because I feel like you're looking at 5% maybe that you're going to end up collecting on the accounts that are overdue. So in our mind, as soon as somebody hits that 31-day mark, they're outside of the month, it's overdue. And so we need to have a really solid system in place in the practice. One, for collecting to begin with, because when it's 100%, you're not chasing as much. And then when you do have outstanding balances, you need to be really diligent and have a person who owns collecting on those balances, because the longer they sit unpaid, the less likely it is that it's going to end up in your bank account at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's usually the tip of the iceberg. So that's the financial piece of it. So like you said, Miranda, having 5%, leaving it on the table, just in $1 million, that's $50,000. That's a lot. It pays a lot of bills. And that's part of your retirement plan.
That could be a month of expenses. Yeah.
100%. I'll also tell you that that's only the beginning, because if you're collecting 95%, there's a little bit of fear, or if not a lot of fear, around money in your practice. Your fees are probably a little too low. You need someone who's strong. And this is the cool part about coaching, or you come to Miranda's admin course. You can train people on how to collect money. And it's amazing. There aren't a lot of great courses out there on how to collect money. Dentists just throw people into the mix and go, just ask for money. Well, they've never been trained. That's one of the most important disciplines in a dental practice. There has to be excellent training on how to collect money. And
when I listen in a dental practice and I hear, it's so common. So did you want to take care of that today? And I'm like, or what? So then the patient leaves and I'm like, so tell me, what was their other option? Just not taking care of it today? It's just simple language changes. And once someone gets comfortable with modifying those verbal skills, it can change significantly your collections in the practice.
Oh, absolutely. And I could spend 10 minutes on this one, but the best time to do anything is when the patient is in the office. It's so cumbersome to call them afterwards, to chase them. They're right here, right now. Ask them for the money.
How would you like to take care of that today?
Let's do it.
Simple.
Yeah. And if you haven't paid before today, I need to speak to you when you get here so that you pay, because we're going to teach you how to pay.
Yes, we could. Well, we probably have and could. We might already have it. A whole webinar on just how do we work around making sure that we collect 100%. It's very simple, very small changes in the practice to get there. And the point of it is, same thing. You can grow your bank account. You can grow the profitability of your practice. You can reduce your stress and have more of what you want by just collecting more of what you produce. Like it's pretty simple when it comes down to it.
100%.
All right. The next piece is understanding your overhead. And you and I both feel very similar on this. I never, ever want someone to just nitpick over, like, I want you to have the gloves that you need in the practice. I want you to have the equipment that you need in the practice. I was a hygienist chairside for 15 years. I needed Cavitron tips when I needed Cavitron tips. So I want offices to be able to support their practice. And again, you're going to have to support your gross production with these expenses. And so that's why it's really important to make sure that we're not always going to be able to affect our overhead as much within the overhead itself. I do think you can kind of fine tooth comb through your overhead expenses and get lean on some things. Most of the time, you're going to impact your overhead by being able to collect more, because what we know is these are the ongoing costs required to run a dental practice. And this is excluding the dentist's income, and it's a percentage of collections. So if your percentage of overhead is really high and you've dug through it and you're like, there's really nothing I can skimp on here. I'm at the bare minimum and my expenses as it is. At this point, then we're going to need to work on elevating our collections. And that's why these gaps kind of work together. We're going to need to reduce our write-offs so that we can collect more. We're going to need to make sure that collections gap is at 0. We're collecting 100% so that then our overhead is less of a percentage of that.
Yeah. And this is really, again, overhead is not overhead. So when people say, well, my overhead's 55%, well, my overhead's 65%, that is not apples to apples. And let me give you a little further explanation. In a $2 million practice, gross production, one is writing off 10%, another one's writing off 40%. I can already tell you the one that's writing off 40%, obviously they're collecting a lot less, but they probably have an extra person at the front. They probably have an extra hygienist. So you can see the amount of resources that go to a practice that's writing off that is more. You can have two people run a great $2 million practice with 10% write-offs by collecting the full fee and managing a tight schedule that isn't so hectic. And so what most dentists do when they hear their overhead is too high is they start to nitpick. And if I get one more email on a buying group, I'm going to lose my mind. There's another buying group in dentistry where you can get really cheap stuff. And I'm like, that is not your problem. You can actually grow your practice and have more money to spend on your overhead. It will be a lower percentage of your collections. And that's for another webinar.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Kirk, that $2 million practice. And one of them has what, $190,000, 2 million to 100. If your expenses are the same, they're both $2 million practices and their expenses are $70,000 a piece, but that percentage coming out of $1.9 million versus coming out of $1 million, because you wrote off half of your, is going to make your overhead percentage higher. And so the expense amount could be exactly the same. And they could have a, 15% higher overhead percentage in one practice over the other. And it's simply because they don't have as much collections to be able to divide that against or compare that against. Now, we like to try to encourage teams to be around that 60% mark. And not just in your expenses alone, it's the whole big picture. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It's not like we want you to get to 60% and you're going to be able to do that exactly as you are now. No, you might have to actually start collecting more. You might need to shift your write-offs. You might need to get to 100% and not 95% collections. And that will start working you towards that 60%. If we look at benchmarks, there are benchmarks in the industry, and we do definitely encourage our teams to try to stay within these benchmarks. I think the biggest challenge for most teams that I work with is team compensation. It is almost impossible to be near 25% right now unless you're really, really, really good at managing those first two areas, which is around your write-offs and around your collections. And then dental supplies. A lot of our teams are well over 5% in their dental supplies right now. And so if we look at just two areas that are most commonly askew, it's going to be our team comp and lab expenses. And that feeds directly into what you were saying earlier, which is we need more people, right? If we don't manage that top end and we have quantity over quality, and we have to see more people and we have to stay busier, then we're going to have a higher team comp because one, we're going to have more bodies that we're having to put in the mix to take care of all those patients. And we're writing off more. So our collections isn't as high, but we still have to pay people. And right now we have to pay people top dollar because we're in the middle of like a bit of a hiring crisis. So team comp is one of the hardest things I think for people to stay lean on. But these are the general avenues within our overhead that we're looking at: team compensation, our facilities and equipment, our operating expenses. Dental supplies is an easy one to take a look at and trim a little bit. I was working with a team just the other day who they're at about 6.3% typically on average with their dental supplies. And I'm like, if you just went to 5%, you're saving $4,000 a month. Yeah. Because of the size of their practice. If you're spending 13.5 instead of 17.5 every single month and you trim from 6.3 to 5%, you just saved $4,000. Now we have to be realistic around dental supplies, but I also say, like, what is hiding in your operatories, team? There's so much inventory hiding in the cabinets in your operatories. So I think there's little things we can do within the overhead gap and within our expenses that can make change. The greater change to overhead comes from the top and making sure that we're collecting as much as we can and that we're minimizing how much we're writing off so that we can collect more.
Yeah. And just looking at this slide, one more thought is that if you look at the percentages, I mean, the biggest percentage of overhead you will ever have is in your team compensation. And I'll just tell you this from experience of 30 years of doing this. Once it gets over 30 and you get close to 33, Frank Spears said this years ago, no one's happy. The team members aren't happy. Doctor's not happy. Everybody's pretty unhappy because they feel overworked and underpaid. And I have found that to be absolutely true. And really what it is, it's really poor design. You know, either the practice isn't collecting enough or they aren't systems driven. They're people dependent, which means We're just throwing people at everything. So there's a lot of layers to that. And that's why working with a great coach is so helpful. But here's what's important to understand about team compensation. You as a dentist are going to have to invest in people more and more in the future. You can't just look for people that want less. Your better team members that you're going to find are going to want to be paid at the higher levels. They're going to want to have raises. And I think it's our responsibility, my responsibility specifically as a business owner, to make sure that the practice or the business has margin.
Well, even new graduates, you mentioned
right?
The best of the best, but even new graduates right now are expecting top dollar.
100%. And it's not always true, but it is true a lot of the time. You get what you pay for when it comes to talent. You find somebody talented, they're going to ask you for that. So understanding your overhead is an important piece of it. But also know just trimming things doesn't make it better.
Yeah, there's little movement when you're doing that, but the bigger picture comes when we can make that top line grow. With that, the write-off piece is the biggest piece of the puzzle when it comes to overhead for most of our teams. I did just kind of breeze through what's encompassed within each of those areas of our overhead, but only because I don't think it's nearly as important as some of the other content that we need to get to. But again, the point of that is you can grow. You can grow by controlling your expenses. And there are some people who are a little out of control with that. So when I say this isn't where we want to start, some people, we might start here. If it's looking really out of control. So the next piece of this that's where our P&L generally stops. So for all the doctors on the call, you get your P&L, you might review your finances once a year, maybe twice a year. I'd say every 6 months is pretty common for most of the doctors that we work with. And that's where it stops and it says like, okay, this is the money that you collected. This is the expenses that went out. You're doing great. Look at the profit that you have in the practice. But then you're like, but wait a minute, where did all my money go? So we want to look at, how do all of these gaps feed into one another? And the final gap is around our cash flow and where does that money go in the end? So this is our gap scorecard. And this is something that we utilize working with our To the Top Study Club members and our pro coaching clients. And it really helps doctors to be able to see, okay, from every ounce of effort that I have to put out to generate my gross production, where does everything go in the process? And so in this particular example right here, you see this starts with gross profit. Then we look at that write-off percentage. In this particular practice, it looks like they're averaging, I got to move my thing, 14% in write-offs. It's not terrible. I would venture to guess they might have maybe one insurance plan, or perhaps this is membership plan and adjustments, and they don't have any insurance. Anytime you can get down into the teens, we're usually looking pretty good on those contracts with our insurance plans. So then it tells us our net, and we look at how many days we're working and production per day. And that's our effort gap. What is the difference between what we gross produce, because it takes a certain amount of people and a certain amount of supplies and expenses and utilities and everything else to support that gross production? And what is the difference in that and what we're actually able to collect on? So when we can shrink those write-offs, we can make a greater impact. That feeds us then into that next gap that we talked about, which was collections. And when we're looking at, okay, our net production on average in this practice is 160,087 a month. What are we collecting out of that? And are we in that 100% range? So it looks like this practice isn't collecting 160. They're collecting on average 158,783. So they're actually averaging 98, 99%. There's still a little bit of money left out there that isn't making its way into the bank at the end of the day, where we can reinvest in our team and in our practice. The next chunk is what we were just talking about. It's our overhead. It's the team compensation. It's our facility and equipment, our lab expenses, dental expenses, all of those operational expenses. And a little tip for you, if everyone in the front office has your Amazon password, let's take that away. Speaking from a coach, marketing expenses, discretionary expenses, everything that lives within our overhead is right here in the overhead gap. And this is where we're going to want to make sure that we do look with a fine tooth comb. We put a magnifying glass on some of these expenditures and just see this practice is doing really well at 58.2% overhead. So not as much to worry about there. We do want to maybe go back and look at how could we maybe shrink these write-offs from 14 to 10? And is there a way for us to go from 98, 99% to 100? That's going to also help that overhead gap in the end. And the last piece of this is the cash flow gap. And so we talked about our expenses and everything really falling, looking at that's everything without paying the doctors ultimately. But then sometimes we have loans and things like that that fall within that cash flow gap as well. And I know, Kirk, you'll probably want to chime in here, but when you get that information from your CPA or from your QuickBooks, if you're pulling it yourself, if you're just looking at the P&L and you're not looking at then that cash flow report, that balance statement that helps you to see what's going out, what do we include in there? We talk about taxes and paying our taxes. We talk about loan payments. Maybe you do have a CBCT, or maybe you did invest in new digital software last year, or you did get some new equipment. You went to ADEC and you got really excited and you had to go ahead and purchase a few new things. And so in the end, you're paying every month on that. It's going out. And then you do have to pay yourself. And we follow that profit first model of, doctor, like, you're working really hard. You need to make sure you're paying yourself as well. And so at the end of the day, you could have profit or you may not. It might look like you do on your P&L, but you don't necessarily in real life. And I'll give you one example, and then I'm going to turn it over to you, Kirk. There's a couple of teams in our community. They're about the same size, big teams. They have about 3 doctors apiece. They both mid-year were at about 3.5 million in terms of gross production. One of them is fee for service, and their write-offs are about 6%, collections at 100%, and their overhead is 55. So there's really no gaps. They're doing really, really well. They're under 10% in write-offs. They are collecting 100% of what they are able to collect, and their overhead is healthy at 55%. They have very minimal loans. I think they just have one thing left in loans right now. And they take a good salary. And at the end of the day, they're profiting sometimes $40,000 a month. So on average, between $30,000, $40,000 a month. That's amazing. A similar practice, 3 doctors producing gross, like this is that conversation we talked about earlier of where we're at. They're going to go and have this conversation at a meeting. Oh, I produced 3.5 by July. Me too. Except for this office has 43% write-offs. And so they're already at like 1.9 when it comes down to net. And then from there, so there's a gap. And then from there, they're collecting 97%. So there's another gap, which means their overhead percentage is 72. And a lot of doctors would be like, 72, that's pretty good. Yeah, but couldn't it be so much better? And so at the end of the day, after that doctor gets paid, they're generally on average right now profiting a little over $300. And so this is 2 practices that have about the same size facility. They have about the same number of providers. They're both producing between 3.3, 3.5 by mid-year. One of them has closed these gaps, and they're profiting $30,000, $40,000 a month that's able to go back into the practice. That's going into profit share with the team. And then we have this other practice who is struggling to close some of those gaps because they're still contracted with a significant amount of insurance, writing off 43% of what they do. They're not collecting a full 100% of that. And at the end of the day, by the time they pay all of their expenses and themselves, they have about $300 that they can, put in the bank. And that's kind of like one of the best comparisons I've ever seen. And that's from people right within our community who are doing the work.
Yeah. Gosh, you just opened up a whole bunch of cans here that I just want to keep going on. So first of all, that's a lot of teeth. That's a lot of teeth just to have an actual true profit of $300 at the end of the month. That's just way too hard. Now, let me also say this. The best practice is to buy. Because some of you are thinking, I'm just going to grow because I'm going to get EBITDA and I'm going to sell at a bigger multiple. Okay, first of all, a lot of that is a lie. Secondly, the practices that are the most attractive or businesses in the world to buy, you know which ones they are? They're the ones that are most profitable. It's very hard if I'm a venture capitalist and I have a lot of money to buy a practice that's not profitable. I don't want it. It's too much energy. It's going to take me a long time to realize the profit I give you, or the pay that I give you to realize a profit. So they know that. So if you're scaling to scale, you're going to be greatly disappointed when you get to the event. So that's one thing. One more thing, you use the word QuickBooks and P&L. I'm just going to say this because I don't care anymore and I care about you guys. If you're listening to this, I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. Running a dental practice with a P&L is a terrible idea. It's 1/3 or 1/4 of the story. running your practice with QuickBooks. Now, when I started this business, I'm like, I got QuickBooks. QuickBooks doesn't tell you anything. It just tells you where to put things that are expenses in there. And it helps you organize some of these numbers. Or relying on a dental accountant to tell you how you're doing. That's a terrible idea. There's a few good out there, but you don't know how much you produced. You don't know what the effort went into it. All you're looking at is cash in and where it went out. And your P&L does not show your loans. It doesn't show taxes. That's another thing. And you're like, where's all my money? That's why having a sheet like this, we make our doctors do this. Act Dental is run on a spreadsheet like this. Some companies that are $50 million companies. I have a friend who runs a $100 million company. He's like, no, dude, I run it on a Google sheet. He knows where every dollar comes in. He knows all that stuff. He can see where it comes in and where it goes out. And our hope by showing you this is that we simplify this process so that when you grow, you're growing the right components. And go back to that one slide.
Oh, sure.
I want to leave people with every time you tighten up a gap, one more dollar of profit falls to the bottom. Every time it's making each one of them healthy. And as you do that, either by yourself or with a coach, you're like, wow, I feel better. Wow, I feel better. And you know more about your business. Now you're better, not bigger.
Better, not bigger. I'm going to get you a t-shirt. Oh,
love it.
Maybe Laura's listening.
There you go.
Well, because of time and wanting to be respectful of everyone that's joining us today, let's just do some final takeaways. And then if anybody has any questions, we're happy to answer them. But some things to just think about. Okay, this was awesome. This was mind blowing. What do I do now? Just remember, maximize your existing resources. You don't need to work longer hours or add more chairs to increase profitability. You can fine tune what you currently have. Look at your processes, look at inefficiencies in your practice, look at things like we talked about today, your write-offs. If you don't typically, as a practice owner, stop and pull an adjustment report at the end of every month, just stop. If you're not billing full fee, maybe that's where you start. Just choose one area to focus on first and dig in. So improving write-offs, improving collections, you can unlock those hidden profits that live right within your practice. Look at your overhead. Small, manageable changes within your overhead costs and cash flow have a big impact on your bottom line. If you're currently only pulling a P&L or pulling your P&L from your QuickBooks, if you work with a CPA and they send your P&L every month, ask them to send your cash flow report. Ask them to send your balance sheet. Be able to look a little deeper into what's the rest of that story. Where can you control some of those expenses and where can you gain more profit without adding more stress? And in the end, you just have to close the gaps. And that's where your sustainable growth comes in. When you shrink all of those gaps, you shrink that effort gap, you shrink your collections gap, you shrink your overhead gap, your cash flow gap. Whether it's uncollected production or unnecessary overhead, you will free yourself from the pressure of constant expansion. When you feel like I have to do more because I need more, we're telling you there's a different side to this story that more doesn't always give you that. You have the tools to be free within your business. We can help you. It's going to help you avoid burnout. It's going to help you feel more balanced, and it's going to help you feel happy showing up every day in the workplace. Kirk, any other final takeaways from you?
Yes, a few. If you're listening to this, I'll just say, negative information anywhere goes farther, goes bigger. Good information doesn't get spread a lot. So the narrative, and the narrative in dentistry is this expensive. It's not that much fun. It's burnout. It's way too hard to make a profit. And I'm just here to tell you, and I'm sure you could echo this, Miranda, that's just not true. I mean, if you know your numbers, you get your handle on this, you can actually have a great career. You can work a reasonable life of 180 days a year. You can make an amazing living. You can pay your team really well. You can have a great culture. You can see patients a few hours a day. You can work 7 to 3. You can have an incredible life. You don't have to work evening, Saturday, sign up for everything, blah, blah, blah. And knowing all of this calms you. It makes you enjoy the moment. Let me share a little bit more. For all of you listening, here's what's going to happen at some point in your career. At some point, you're going to be driving by this apartment complex on your way to work. And you're going to go, wow, they just flattened that whole apartment complex. It's 2 blocks from my office. What are they putting there? And then you're going to hear a month later, they're putting a 22 operatory practice. Some DSO VC companies coming in, they're going to put an amazing practice and they're going to do endo. They're going to do perio. They're going to be open till 9 p.m. They take every insurance under the sun. They don't have one CBCT. They have 3 of them. They also do peds. They do pediatric dentistry on Sunday all day to get the adult patients to come in so they can get crowns on those people too. And man, they're going to have everything. They even have a helicopter pad up top to pick up and drop off patients. And what you have to say to yourself when you drive by that thing that goes up, you have to say to yourself, knock yourself out. You know what? I work with a great coach like Miranda. I know my numbers. I make a ton of money. I'm having a great time. I don't need to compete with that, because if you don't, you're going to be thinking that's the future of dentistry. And my small little 5 operatory practice isn't going to survive. Well, you're going to do so well because there's going to be so many patients from that 22 operatory practice that are going to come over to yours and go, I hate it over there. And you just got to be ready for it and sleep well. Knowing your numbers, you can sleep calmly and you can say, I love this profession. So thanks for letting me be here, Miranda.
Oh my gosh, I loved it. Guess what? We get to do it again in 2 weeks.
Yes. What's the topic of that one?
In 2 weeks, on our next webinar on the 24th, we're going to be talking about going from chaos to control and how systems can really transform the practice. So one of the things you were just talking about, Kirk, is the burnout and the way that you can feel stressed out at work. And even in doing all of this, you can still feel stressed, even if you have money going in the bank, if you have that people-dependent practice and you don't have systems in place that are really helping to make optimization of your time. So next time, we're going to talk a little bit about how systems can help to control some of the chaos that we feel day to day in the dental practice. This has been fun.
Awesome. They're always fun. So thank you guys for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll stick around for a few questions if there are any questions. If not, you can add them to the BPA. I'm going to remind you, make sure you sign up for the BPA. We have our own customized app coming. It's a few weeks away. We are so excited about it. You're going to be able to take this on the go and you'll be able to create more value, think better about the way you practice and enjoy this. And everything we do is going to be about making you and helping you create a better practice and better life. So
yeah, there was a couple of questions that we answered along the way. However, there is one question that just came in that somebody asked about the GAP scorecard. And yes, that is part of our To the Top Study Club and our pro coaching community. We utilize that scorecard with those people specifically. However, we have so many resources that feed into that within the BPA, and you can always reach out to Gina. That isn't accessible outside of the To the Top Study Club or the pro coaching community, but we have so many other resources that Gina can help you with. Again, that's Gina at actdental.com.
So good. Awesome.
That's it. This has been fun. Thanks for joining me, Kirk.
Yeah, thanks for having me on here. And I'll say goodbye to everybody else. But thank you guys for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We are always here to help. And keep showing up. Join us for To the Top Study Club. Join us in BPA. And if you just want to talk and you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're going to be helpful, just like Miranda said. So hope you guys enjoy your day. And we'll see you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.